A warning about the safety of the food you feed your family. We investigate the fragmented system of oversight that could put your health at risk.
I couldn't believe that the food that I loved and ate every day almost killed me.
Plus, residents claim in a lawsuit their city contaminated its own drinking water.
They didn't ask us. Nobody came up and knocked on my door and said, "Can we have permission to use your address for this sludge field that we're dumping out here?" Oh, no. No, 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 no.
Plus, a look into the minds of season predicting animals. We put Punxsutawney and his pals' projections through a rigorous investigative data analysis.
I think it's a fantastic tradition.
Investigate TV Plus Weekend starts right now. Hello and welcome to Investigate TV Plus Weekend. I'm Lee Zurich. Each year, contaminated food sickens more people than the entire population of Texas. About 125,000 are hospitalized and about 3,000 people die. Critics say the blame falls squarely on the U.S. government and a patchwork of oversight on the food you eat. Reporter Chris Nakamoto spent months digging and found a confusing system that allows communication gaps to turn into possible safety risks.
Always ate fresh, always ate clean. Then I started having stomach bug issues. Very lethargic. It just got worse and worse. My doctor called my husband and said, "Get her to the hospital now. She has E. coli." I was starting delirium. The food that I loved and ate every day almost killed me.
Annette Martin says her case is among a national outbreak that killed 5 people, hospitalized 96, and sickened 210 people. Confirmed by samples, the lettuce was contaminated with E. coli from cattle feedlots that drained into an irrigation canal above where the produce was grown in Arizona.
When I read the hospital transcript, they had actually talked to my husband Mitch and my son Zach about putting me on life support.
Martin says doctors treated her with a cocktail of experimental drugs, and she began to turn the corner. After recovering, Martin did an internet search and came across America's leading food safety lawyer, Bill Marler.
Before the Jack in the Box case, it was completely legal to knowingly sell E. coli contaminated hamburger to the public.
Over the past 3 decades, Bill Marler's work has highlighted just how fragile and fragmented America's food regulations are. Our national investigative team spent months digging and found the system is siloed. The Food and Drug Administration regulates seafood, dairy, produce, nuts, and cereal, just to name a few, about 80% of the food you eat. The United States Department of Agriculture oversees meat, poultry, processed egg products, and catfish, the other 20%. Marler says frozen pizza is a good example of the mess. A frozen cheese pizza is regulated by the FDA. Add meat, the USDA regulates it.
Nobody would set up a food safety system the way we have it in 2024.
There are also more than a dozen other federal agencies that regulate it, along with local and state health departments. As fragmented as the regulations are on food, state reporting requirements to the government are even more chaotic and not being enforced. In 2022, the FDA reported infant formula contamination from a Michigan factory, caused the deaths of 2 babies and sent several others to the hospital, leading to recalls and formula shortages.
That FDA was actually conducting an inspection of that facility where they were making the formula, and they identified problems.
Chronobacter sakazaki was the pathogen found in the formula. The CDC added it to a watch list in January as a nationally notifiable disease, meaning it's on a list of around 120 diseases the federal government wants states to let them know about when cases pop up. But our national investigative team found as of May, it's up to each state to decide what results from patients it actually reports to the CDC. We contacted all 50 states and the District of Columbia and found 27 states report cases of Chronobacter sakazaki, 22 of them don't. 1 state and the District of Columbia did not respond.
There's no really one person in charge or a group of people in charge. The ability to go, hey, we should fix this and this is how we should do it.
It sounds like a simple fix. Why hasn't it been fixed?
There's a lot of powerful people, who like the status quo. There's a lot of organizations that, ostensibly are there to support the industry.
Investigate TV analyzed 140 foodborne illness outbreaks that sickened Americans in multiple states. Federal investigators could only trace the tainted product to a farm, factory, or meat processing facility in 59 of the cases, showing how tough it is to find the source. In 36 outbreaks, they couldn't even determine which food was responsible. It's that lack of being able to trace back sources and other issues that had the Government Accountability Office first clamoring for change in 2007, with 4 presidents and Congress failing to act.
We're continuing to press for, a more unified strategy type effort that brings all the key players together.
With Martin's new outlook on life, she started growing her own lettuce and has totally changed the way she eats.
If there's a chance that it could be dangerous, I cook it if it's possible.
The Food Safety Working Group, or FSWG, was established in 2009 to coordinate federal efforts and develop goals to make food safer. The GAO says it has not met since 2011. Congress passed the Food Safety Modernization Act 14 years ago, giving the FDA recall authority for food. Critics say despite those positive efforts, it doesn't address the fragmentation of the system. After the break, reporter Chris Nakamoto joins us. We'll learn more about a recent massive E. coli outbreak, plus ways to keep your family safe. As the nation continues to grapple with food safety and recalls, one that caught a lot of attention was back in October when there was another E. coli outbreak at a popular fast food restaurant. Reporter Chris Nakamoto joins me now with more about food safety. Chris, what are leading food safety lawyers saying now?
Well, that's right, Lee. They are saying that the actual number is probably higher than what's been reported, and that's simply because you got to think about it. If you get sick, oftentimes you may take something over the counter. If you feel better, you may not go to a doctor. Ultimately, if you go to a doctor, they take a blood test and they can determine whether or not your sickness is related to the outbreak. And so ultimately, if you don't go to the doctor, then that number is not going to be reported. So the leading food safety lawyers believe that that number is much more elevated than is actually reported to the government. One thing that's also really interesting is there's this real dynamic in America where they tell you, shop the perimeter of the grocery store. That's where all the healthy food is. All the processed stuff is in the middle. So all your fruits and veggies, your meats, your dairy, all on the perimeter. That's also the most risky. You have to wash your produce. You also have to cook your meats. That's all on the perimeter of the grocery store.
So what are some other things families can do to stay safe?
That's a really good question. So the biggest thing that families can do to stay safe, cook your meats to 165-degree temp. Also, wash your fruits and veggies. You have to make sure that just because the package says triple washed, it doesn't mean it's potentially clean. So you have to wash it thoroughly underwater. One thing that we've done at our home after this investigation, my kids love cantaloupe. So what we wound up doing is we will avoid the pre-cut stuff. We'll take a cantaloupe, we'll wash it underwater with a little mild detergent, and then we'll cut it and then serve it to the family. Because ultimately what we were told was if the exterior of that cantaloupe is contaminated, what can happen is you cut into the cantaloupe and then the cantaloupe ultimately contaminates the fruit inside that you're going to be feeding your family. The knife will transfer some of those germs.
Learning from your own investigations.
Yes.
I like that. All right, any traction changes at the federal level?
Yes, there have been a lot of traction actually. So in October, there's a new unified food group that was modernized by the FDA. And essentially what that did was it restructured some of the investigating processes and it made it a little bit more robust. So it affected about 8,000 employees at the FDA, but it's still too early to tell whether or not that's going to have any sort of impact on food safety.
All right, obviously, clearly, this is not a concern just here in the U.S. How do other countries handle food monitoring?
America's food safety is relatively safe. Let's face it, everybody in America has to eat, and a very small fraction of people get sick every year. But some countries do it better according to the experts. Europe, for example, they're very focused on regulations. So for example, E. coli, they are very strict about E. coli. So if E. coli is found in the plants where the food is being processed, then it doesn't go out to the public. In America, what we typically see is when people get sick, they get sick after they've already consumed it. So there's that kind of misstep in the plant before the food goes out where people actually get sick after they've consumed it, as opposed to other countries where they're testing it before it goes out to human consumption.
All right, Chris Nakamoto, some good lessons learned today. Thanks.
We've known this for as long as human beings have been here. You don't poop where you drink.
Up next, concerns over high concentrations of forever chemicals in a city's drinking water. Why people who live there say the problem came right from their own leadership. Dozens of neighbors have sued their city, claiming it contaminated its own drinking water, exposing residents to a group of cancer-causing toxins known as forever chemicals. Reporter Andy Parati sat down with one resident who filed suit and shared some of the initial water testing with a scientist who called the findings, quote, incredibly concerning.
Ever since I was a little kid, I have been writing.
Colleen Brooks combs through old newspapers.
It's one of my favorite players.
Where she contributed as a columnist in Calhoun, Georgia for more than 30 years.
I probably wrote 10,000 maybe.
Covering everything from romance,
yes,
movies, and the weather.
On April 22nd, 1988, A Snow Lover's Lament.
Today, she's lamenting about another story making headlines, not as its author, but as an alleged victim of a potential environmental disaster. This past May, she and dozens of her neighbors filed a lawsuit claiming the city of Calhoun contaminated their drinking water with a cancer-causing toxin. According to the suit, the city spread 28,000 tons of sewage or sludge in fields near their homes with high concentrations of a chemical called PFAS, known as forever chemicals, seeping into their land and wells for more than 20 years. According to this city permit, one of the sludge fields used Colleen's home address.
I thought, wait a minute. You know, they can't do that. They didn't ask us. Nobody came up and knocked on my door and said, can we have permission to use your address for this sludge field that we're dumping out here? Oh, no. No, 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 no.
How did the toxin get into the sewage? The lawsuit claims the city allowed industrial wastewater from carpet manufacturers that use PFAS to flow into Calhoun's sewage treatment plant. The chemicals are then mixed with the sludge and later dumped on land along the Coosawattee River, where the city draws its drinking water.
They put sludge upriver, right next to a river, from where they pull the drinking water.
Heath Brooks is the lawyer who filed the lawsuit on behalf of the residents.
We've known this for as long as human beings have been here. You don't poop where you drink. And that's what the city did. They put it right next to their intakes. And so they polluted their own city.
The issue is personal for Heath. Colleen isn't just a client, she's his mother.
Did you ever think in your wildest dreams you'd be representing your own parents in a lawsuit?
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. No, I didn't. I didn't in my wildest nightmare think that I'd be representing my parents and my aunts and my uncle and the people that I grew up with along this road. They can't jump into a swimming pool because their swimming pools are filled with the water from a polluted well. They can't go out and use their wells to water their garden because their gardens are polluted.
This past April, the Environmental Protection Agency set PFAS limits in drinking water to 4 parts per trillion. Water samples taken by the attorney from 5 Calhoun homes show levels ranging from 70 parts per trillion to more than 8,000. Dr. David Andrews is with the Environmental Working Group and has years of experience in PFAS research.
When you hear those numbers, what goes through your mind?
Those are shockingly high and incredibly concerning and indicate the extreme levels of contamination.
While the impact to residents' health is unclear, a city nearby could offer a glimpse of what's to come. Later this summer, Emory University will launch an exposure study to test hundreds of residents for PFAS in Rome, Georgia. Its study in direct response to an Atlanta News First investigation last year that tested residents' blood, uncovering elevated levels of the toxin in nearly every participant.
We didn't know that this issue existed before your study.
Emory University lead scientist, Dr. Dana Barr.
In thinking back, it should have been very intuitive that there was going to be an issue because of all the carpet industry and the use of PFAS as stain repellents and water repellents and things like that. We just didn't really know about the issue before then.
Attorneys for Calhoun declined to comment on the lawsuit, but in court documents claim the city is a victim too, filing suit against carpet manufacturers that allegedly contaminated the river used for drinking water located upstream in Dalton, Georgia, a city that proudly proclaims itself the carpet capital of the world.
Well, it seems as if one of our government agencies has gone and done it again.
Someone had a gut feeling there was a potential problem years before anyone else.
Yeah, I remember that now.
It was Colleen. She wrote about it in this 2004 column titled Spreading It Around, after witnessing city trucks spray something on fields across from her home for years.
I've been told that this stuff has been treated, so it's okay. Treated with what? Chemicals? I wrote about it, and I questioned it.
20 years ago, you wrote about this.
Yeah, and I didn't know what it was.
Colleen says she spoke to someone at City Hall, but can't remember who.
They told me that it was perfectly safe and that it was good for the land. And I thought, dumping that smelly, not right stuff could not possibly be right for this land. What I really feel is betrayed.
Ever wondered how animal predictions for spring work out? Our investigative team digs into groundhogs across America after the break. A largemouth bass in Ohio, a tortoise in Nevada, and of course a groundhog in Pennsylvania. You might be on to where we're going now. Weather prediction animals. Every year towns across America host events to see if spring will come early or winter is staying. Our national investigative team loves crunching numbers and wondered how often the opossums, penguins, and porcupines are right. Here's Josie Sturman with your answer.
And I'll shout, "Good morning!"
in a tiny Pennsylvania town.
And then I'll turn around and I'll say, "Welcome to Groundhog Day!"
in the middle of a February night.
And then they shoot fireworks up in the air. The crowd just goes, "Ah!"
Thousands gather to watch Tom Dunkel kick off a time-honored tradition, what has become the world's biggest celebration for a rodent who predicts the weather.
Phil! Phil!
There may be no more famous Phil on the planet, but even better than simply joining the crowds who worship at his wooden altar in Punxsutawney is meeting Phil up close and personal.
Hey, Phil.
For an investigation into predictions made by this prognosticator and those who follow in his shadow.
Big day's coming, Phil.
In terms of wild animals predicting weather, there is no bigger day than February 2nd, when the patron saint of seasonal shifts makes his call. Early spring or 6 more weeks of winter. Dunkel, president of the Punxsutawney Groundhog Club and leader of its top-hatted inner circle, says Phil doesn't play favorites.
He's going to go back to bed one way or the other.
But Phil breaks his hibernation briefly each year, Dunkel says, to scurry out, study up on the conditions, and fulfill his obligation as the seer of seers.
What do you think about this, that the nation looks to a groundhog to find out whether or not winter is going to continue?
Well, I think it's a fantastic tradition. In a world where there is a lot of serious things happening, it is something fun that happens literally in the middle of the winter.
But as investigative reporters, it's our job to take the fun out of everything. So our national team decided to run the analytics on this annual tradition, comparing local temperature and growing season data to Phil's predictions to see how often he hit the mark. The National Weather Service experts have long put Phil's accuracy rate at around 40%. But our investigation shows that for where he lives, he's actually right about 80% of the time. Oh, but we didn't stop there. We took our scientific method to the masses, crunching the numbers on dozens of weather critters across the country. From Sand Mountain Sam in Alabama to Sonny the Sloth in Louisville.
It's the closest thing that we have to a groundhog.
Asante the meerkat in Albany and Poppy the prairie dog in Oklahoma. While groundhogs dominate the game, there are also hedgehogs, lobsters, tortoises, ducks, squirrels, and even a largemouth bass. These furry, feathered, scaly, and sometimes even stuffed animals all make their own wild guess. With plenty of smack talk, that's all in good fun. At least we think so.
I don't know. Grandma always said you can't ever trust a rodent.
So they don't see the weather, they don't observe it, they don't know what's going on.
Compare Piscopenny to that chubby groundhog up in Pennsylvania. Oh, no. You know, there is no comparison.
So how do they measure up against the main man of Punxsutawney? We found that overall, on average, they're correct about spring's arrival in their area about 60% of the time.
What do you think about this trend of having creatures of all sorts predict the weather, predict when we'll see the end of a season?
Really? It's ridiculous, but there's only one groundhog, and that's Phil.
Joe Murgo may be just a smidge biased.
Hey everyone!
He's been front row at Gobbler's Knob 23 years straight.
Phil makes a prognostication one day a year, but the other 364, he used to watch me on TV.
So we asked the trusted meteorologist and college educator to weigh in on our findings, which show that an Alabama opossum and Connecticut's scrambled the duck are actually outperforming that world-famous groundhog ever so slightly.
You can't prove them wrong because there's no set definition. It's the best forecast you can ever make.
That's why Murgo says you've got to really look at hyper-local data, which is exactly what our investigation did. And even if it shows the animals don't always get it right on Groundhog Day, who cares?
It is a day in February celebrating no matter what that things are changing. A change of the seasons is coming our way.
A celebration of what's ahead regardless of what's picking the forecast, as communities like Punxsutawney give people a way to weather their way through winter together.
It's magical, truthfully.
And that's it for us. Thanks for joining us here on Investigate TV Plus Weekend. Hope to see you next week.